All right. BC and Duke. It's another game. BC's going to need a win. Can they do it? We're getting closer to the end of the season, and the possible wins are starting to dry up. This might be one of the last chances Boston College has a chance for win number 3. We're going to look at the game itself with Mitch Wolf of Eagle Insider and talk about Jurkovec versus Morehead. Look at the outcome of this game and predictions and all the other goodies that we always talk about on our Friday show. Check this all out on today's Locked On Boston College.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On BC, AJ Black here, and today's episode is brought to you by Underdog. Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com with the promo code Locked On and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Check out Underdog. Now, Mitch is with us today on Fridays. It's a love of labor here for both of us as we're watching a BC team that seems to be steadily heading downwards, and we can't give it up though. Mitch, how's it going?
Doing good. It'll be nice to watch this game and get it over with so you can watch the rest of the games this weekend. I know earlier in the season we talked about kind of jokingly, how many teams is BC better than? And I was thinking about that this past week, and I was at least teams like in the Power 5. And I was like, man, BC's definitely in the bottom 5, maybe even in the bottom 3, and possibly the worst Power 5 team in college football.
Yeah, it's pretty bad right now, and I know a lot of the folks out there listening are not too keen on where the program is right now, as we've talked about Jeff Hafley's future earlier this week. Duke is 5-3. They're a team that seems to have everything put together. They've got a good culture there. We talked with JJ Jackson yesterday, who talked about how Mike Elko, former Texas A&M defensive coordinator, has really done a nice job of taking over for as head coach of this team and giving them some direction. Mitch, before we get into the game itself, what have you noticed so far about Duke?
I've noticed that their offense it's like a very conservative offense, but it's very efficient. They're kind of the inverse of BC in that, their offensive line is really good, number one, so they run the ball well. And then, there's nothing too crazy about the offense. Like, they don't really have any players that are, super awesome or anything, but they all just fit together well. The offense doesn't ask a lot of them, but then the players, because they all work well together, the total is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, essentially, for this team. They have a quarterback who's a young guy. He's not doing a ton, but he's just, keeping the offense on schedule, which is important. That's why they've been able to win the games they have. Every game they've lost, it's been close. 8 points to Kansas when Kansas was humming along. Then 3-point losses to Georgia Tech in overtime, and then North Carolina. So all those losses are high quality losses. And the other games that they've won, they've pretty much won pretty handily. Northwestern was kind of a scare early in the season, but since then they've been winning by multiple scores against a, pretty weak ACC Coastal. But their defense, they are really good against the run, which is surprising given that they are almost exclusively in nickel and dime sets. I think it's something like 97, 98% in nickel or dime. They're really solid against the run, but they're not as great against the pass yet, even though they have a lot more defensive backs in the field and they are usually in too high shells. So it's an interesting team to watch. And, they're only one win away from bowl game, which I think for most Duke fans and people who follow the ACC, I think that's pretty far ahead of schedule for what people thought this Duke team was going to be under Mike Elko.
Yeah, I mean, last year this team was allowing 40 points per game, and I believe they're down to somewhere in the 20s, and so that just kind of shows you what Elko is doing. And for BC fans that want to get really angry, and I know a lot of you are, Elko, I believe, was a name that had been floated at least during the last coaching search. I know he was a rumored candidate when Hafley was hired, but I also think he was also a candidate when Adazio was hired. So he's been a name that's been popped around a lot, and he's done. He has history from Texas A&M, Wake Forest, and Notre Dame, and has done a nice job there. Now, let's look at this team itself. We'll get into the quarterback in our second segment, but Mitch, when you're looking at Duke and this running attack, I don't think BC's really had much other than has much experience this year playing a mobile quarterback. And Riley Leonard had 3 touchdowns on the ground against Miami 2 weeks ago. Are you concerned about that against a BC's defense?
Well, I mean, they did a decent job, slowing down Malik Cunningham from a yardage standpoint. He did score 3 rushing touchdowns, but all of them were inside the 10. So, it was a far cry from when they played Cunningham the year before, where he just ran wild all over the field. In terms of the other teams, Rutgers has one in theory, but they didn't use it as much. Clemson, Uyangale had a big run towards the end of the game when the game was essentially over, so it's not as important. I think they've done a better job at handling mobile quarterbacks this year, but I mean, yeah, Leonard's their leading rusher. He has 8 touchdowns, 3 of them coming last week, so that number is a little inflated from, one extreme performance. But yeah, I mean, a lot of their offense is like RPO, option run kind of stuff, so they're going to need to stay disciplined to make sure that he isn't, killing them on the ground. I mean, he's a big guy, 6'4", 212. He can run. He's not really asked to throw on the run. I mean, that's the thing about Leonard is like when the offense is working and he can just throw from the pocket, he's good. But once he gets pressured, when he has to throw down the field, that's when the problems start to happen. Cause like looking at his PFF grades, and even just his completion percentage, when he's pressured versus when he's not pressured, it drops like 20%, his completion percentage, that is. And he's rarely asked to throw the ball downfield. I think only like 10% of his throws are 20 yards or more down the field, which I would need to look deeper in the numbers, see like where that places among other quarterbacks, but you just don't see him throwing deep very often. So, everything is, very quick throws, get the ball out of his hands. And even when he is asked to throw, like his offensive line is quite good. So he can stay in that pocket, but if a defense can confuse him, then with pressure and then some, different looks, they might be able to have some success against him.
All right. In a moment, we're going to just flip the script and talk a little bit about BC's offense and a big question mark going into Friday's game. And we'll get into that question mark in just a moment. Now, this episode is brought to you by Underdog. And Underdog is the place to go when you want to make your daily fantasy. It's easy to play and available in over 30 states. For me, I am going with Duke quarterback Riley Leonard with higher than 15.5 rushing yards against Boston College. You make that pick, you add in maybe, I don't know, Drake May lower than 300.5 passing yards against Virginia. You put those 2 picks together, you hit them both, you're a winner. It's so easy to play. You just pick between 2 and 5 players across any team, not just the Eagles, and decide if they will finish higher or lower than the stats that they provide. It's one of the easiest games to pick up, and when you win cold hard cash right on spot. So head on over to underdogfantasy.com and sign up with the promo code LOCKEDON, one word, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. Again, deposit $100 and get $100 free. That's a win right there. Go to underdogfantasy.com or find the Underdog Fantasy app in the App Store, Google Play Store. Again, that's Underdog Fantasy, promo code LOCKEDON. Get in the college football pick'em action today. All right, Locked On BC, AJ Black. For those of you that are listening along, thank you all who have made Locked your first listen every day. And if you haven't done so already, please make sure to hit our subscribe button on YouTube. It's easy, and it's the easiest way to support our pod. Get free BC videos sent directly to you. Now, Mitch, the big question mark going into this game is one that I don't think many people honestly care all that much about. Because it doesn't really matter. But I think there's some folks out there that are really revved up about this, which is the quarterback position. And as we saw last week against UConn, Phil Jurkovec got injured. We don't know the full extent of what happened. Hafley's been pretty quiet about it, as he's usually pretty
Jeff Hafley? Quiet on an injury?
Yeah.
The same?
Yeah. So, we don't know what's going on. All we know is that Phil Jurkovec on I think it was the Monday press conference, Hafley said he hadn't practiced. And there's a possibility going into this game that Emmett Morehead might be the quarterback heading into this game. All right. I know a lot of folks out there are really on this Emmett Morehead kick. and they think that he's going to give them a better chance to win. Do you agree with them?
AJ, who's the most popular player on any football team?
The backup quarterback.
Yep, that's right. I am not super psyched about this. Emmett Morehead has come in and played a decent bit. He's played in garbage time a few games. And frankly, to me, and I know it's against backup defenses, but he still hasn't been very impressive. He's still missing some throws, even and against UConn. Like that, I know he didn't, get the opportunity to run with the first team during the week of practice or whatever, but that's your opportunity to come in and, show you're worth something by beating UConn. And he really wasn't able to do that. And, you can kind of turn all the excuses for Jurkovec on for him. But, my point is that if you're expecting him to be something, I want him to at least show, better than what he did against UConn. And the reason why I've been in favor of keeping Jurkovec in the games is because, you can make the argument that Morehead is better at running the quick passing offense. He's more consistently accurate in that area of the field. However, he is more of a statue in the pocket. I think he can run if need be. I remember seeing that against Syracuse last year, but if the play is not there, he is going to hold on to it and is going to struggle to buy time. Whereas Jurkovec, if it's not there, he can at least, evade a sack, get out of some contact, get out of the pocket, and buy time or scramble for yardage. And I don't think really Morehead can do that as well. So I think instead of we see Jurkovec kind of get outside the pocket and maybe make some bad throws, I think you're going to see Morehead take a lot more sacks against Duke, and they have a pretty quality defensive line. RJ Oben is one of their better I think he's their defensive end, and then their defensive tackle Dwayne Carter is a good player as well. So those are guys you need to watch out for on the defensive line. I have a bad feeling that Jurkovec is not going to play in this game because it is a short week. So I think we are going to see Morehead, and I think the benefit of that at least is that he will get that a full quote unquote week of practice with the ones, and I think with a shorter week they'll shrink the playbook a little bit, shrink the game plan, and so there isn't as much on the plate of the offense, and maybe they can execute a smaller game plan a little better. Essentially shrink the play sheet, and that might go well. But again, Duke's passing defense is not that great. I wrote this in my 3 Keys article to be coming out tomorrow, that their 2 cornerbacks that play on the outside are ranked last and third to last in coverage grade, according to PFF, in the ACC, with a minimum of 20% of the snaps taken. So essentially among ACC starting cornerbacks are guys that play most of the snaps. These 2 guys are the worst starting cornerback pair in the ACC. So, that's at least good. But I think it'll be interesting to see how Morehead attacks this defense, given that they are more of a 2 high shell, middle of the field open. So that's going to funnel more of the throws into the shorter intermediate area of the field, which it's less risky, but if they're kind of rotating coverages in different ways, it can be confusing, especially for a younger quarterback who hasn't seen the field as much.
Yeah, and I go back to the UConn game because I think that was a good example of what he can and can't do. And I think the analyst did a nice job of explaining what he was struggling with, which was, he can get the ball out quick. He did a nice job of getting the ball out quick, which helped him from getting pummeled. However, every pass that he had was off target.
There was one play, which I think it was on one of his first drives, where he hit Joseph Griffin on a slant, and Griffin had plenty of room to run, but he threw it almost in the ground. So Griffin had to go down and get it. And essentially he got 9 yards, but he could have gotten, 15 or even more if he had hit him in stride and hit him going upfield. And again, I know that Jurkovec isn't the best at this either, but I just don't think that Morehead is going to be this, cure all for the offense.
It just, again, I hate going back to this, but it feels again like 2015. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe this is where we're at, but where you have in 2015, you had Troy Flutie and Jeff Smith, and neither guy could do much.
John Fadule, don't forget
John Fadule. Yep. And this year it's Jurkovec who, and I agree with the fans that it's the offense moves like mud when he's out there. And you have Emmett Morehead, who is the other option, but he's not accurate either. So it's choose your own poison at this point. The offense is broken, and neither of these guys are going to fix it, is basically, I think, kind of where we're at.
Yeah. And the thing that you would theoretically want to do to help out really either quarterback, but especially the backup when he's coming in, is oh, okay, we'll run the football, take the game out of his hands. But one, BC has struggled to run the football because of the issues on the offensive line, and two, Duke has one of the best rushing defenses in the country. According to EPA, I think they're the sixth, or maybe what was it? I wrote it down in the article, but they do a really good job of stopping the run, which is surprising given the personnel they use. So it's not going to be like, oh, BC can just run the ball and kill the clock. I mean, if they find some success on the ground, that's great, but that's not something that they'll be able to. I don't think they'll be able to consistently rely on against Duke, because I think Duke's defensive line is going to be able to win the line of scrimmage, which that's going to screw the passing game too. So, I mean, really just the matchup of Duke's defense is really not good for BC's defense or BC's offense, because where BC's offense could succeed in terms of attacking those weaker cornerbacks, they're just not going to be able to have the time to get the ball to the wide receivers in space against those corners.
Yeah. So let's get into predictions. I gave my prediction with JJ yesterday, and I'll give it again in a moment. But Mitch, I'll let you jump in. What is your prediction for this game?
So currently BC is a 9.5 home underdog. Over under is at 46.5. So that's giving you about a projected score of like 28 to like 17.5 ish, or 18.5. 18.5. So, I really want to pick BC to win because just I'm rooting for them to win, obviously. And again, I'm kind of hoping to manifest a victory here. But like I said, I think Duke matches up to, especially on Duke defense versus BC offense, they just match up really well there. And regardless of who plays quarterback, I think BC is just going to have a lot of trouble moving the ball. And I don't think Duke's offense is not particularly explosive, but because they're just able to hold on to the ball and keep drives alive, I think they're going to wear down the BC defense. I don't think this is going to be a high scoring game. I'm going to say 27-17. So really close. I think it's going to be under, but really close. And I think BC has a good shot at covering, maybe late in the game, maybe they kick a late sad field goal to cover. But yeah, it's tough for me to see a legitimately realistic path to BC winning this game.
Just from a betting perspective, BC is 1-7 against the spread this year.
Yikes.
With that one coming against Louisville, obviously, when they were a 13.5 point underdog. So this game has all the markings to me of a Duke rout. And I think one of the bigger, even more so than the offensive line, one of the issues that BC has had all season is that they've played really sloppy.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw it obviously against UConn, where they let up 5 turnovers. And BC was lucky that UConn, I mean, everyone's calling them the team of New England. They played like absolute crap too, and only slightly less crappy than BC to earn a win. So I wasn't all that impressed with what they did either, but it was just BC was just so sloppy. But saying that, if they do what they did against UConn and turn the ball over and make constant mistakes, Duke will make them pay.
Mm-hmm.
They will drag out, as you said, they'll drag out longer possessions. They are a cleaner football team with a good offensive line and a good enough defense to make BC pay. I think BC is going to probably lose this game something like 31-13, and they're not going to even come close to covering.
Yeah, this kind of things makes me, and maybe not as bad, but kind of like the Virginia Tech game where BC is, they're out of it, but it's like not like a complete blowout, but I would say Duke controls the game pretty much throughout. That's kind of how I think about this game.
All right, yeah. So if you have your predictions, throw them up in the comments section. Love to hear what you guys have to say. We'll put them up if you're listening along live. You can we'll comment them on them in a moment. Now in our final segment, time for some betting picks, and we're going to get away from Boston College. And I think we've had, I think it was our friend Chris Davis said, please stop talking about BC football. We will stop talking about BC football for a couple of minutes and talk about some of the big games of the weekend. We'll get to that in just a moment. Locked on Boston College, AJ Black here. I'm the editor and publisher of Eagle Insider, and I'm joined by staff writer Mitch Wolf. And we're going to look at some of the big games this weekend. Mitch, looking at the schedule, is there any games that are sticking out to you?
I mean, it's a shame that BC's game is scheduled when it is, because it overlaps with, as you mentioned, the battle of the two premier New England football schools, which is UConn versus UMass. And this game has a name that I don't think I can say on these airwaves, so I won't say it. But UConn is favored by 15.5 against UMass, which is pretty crazy. I mean, for all the crap we talked about UConn, I think UMass is even worse.
Yep.
I mean, I think they're pretty much in the bottom 10 of just about every category, statistical category you could think of. I think UConn wins this one. I think, honestly, like you said, like they didn't play super well against BC. Like, if they kind of clean things up a little bit, even just a little bit, that'll help them pretty much destroy UMass. So I think UConn beats UMass. I think they cover pretty easily.
All right, now the big game of the week has to be it's the one College Game Day is at, and that's out in the SEC. Tennessee and Georgia. The line, I believe, started at 10.5 for Georgia and has dropped all the way to 8.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia is a factory there in those offense and defensive lines, which makes them a hard bet against any team. But man, Tennessee's playing well. Can
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee pull off this upset?
I think they can. I'm not sure if they will. It's like a lot of people talk about like Tennessee and their skill position players and all that, but I mean, they're really good along the lines too. They've got good defensive line, good offensive line. Not really good offensive line allows them to do so much that they can do on offense. The over under at 66 for this game is pretty crazy to me because I mean, people think about Georgia's defense, and I don't think they're as good as they were last year. Like, not historically good, but they're still, one of the top 5 defense in college football.
Right.
I would take Tennessee to cover here. Absolutely. Plus 230 money line underdogs. That's juicy. I think that's definitely possible. Apparently this is the most expensive, I think, like regular season college football game in history. I think tickets are like $500 right now. Like, that's the cheapest ticket.
Wow.
It's insane. But yeah, I would take Tennessee to cover here. This is going to be really interesting to watch.
All right, next game. Let's stay in the SEC because there's another one on the west side of the bracket. Alabama and LSU. LSU has to be the quietest top 10 team in the country. Not a lot of buzz around this team since their opening. I think their opening week loss to FSU. Can they really hold their own against Bama?
No, but it's weird because, like you said, like they're a top 10 team, which I don't necessarily agree with. But if you think about it, like their 2 losses, like their first loss is to Florida State, and they lost because, week 1, you could say neutral site, but it was essentially a home game for them. And they just had like a lot of special teams mistakes, a lot of like, little things that if you played the game again, if you play that game, 50 times, they probably split it, honestly. So, it wasn't it wasn't like they got, routed by Florida State by any means. So that's a decently, and Florida State's obviously been pretty good. So that's a quality loss. And they get destroyed by Tennessee, who's now the number 1 team in the country. So, these are good. Those are quality loss. They just beat Ole Miss, who was still overrated, but what have you. But I mean, Alabama's Alabama for a reason. I know this isn't their best year, but it is. Apparently, LSU was actually, I can't remember what it was, but in the last like X amount of means, like they haven't beaten Alabama at home at Baton Rouge in like a very long time. I think in the Saban at Bama era, they haven't beaten Bama at LSU, which is pretty crazy. I could be getting that wrong, but I just remember hearing that stat somewhere. So I would take Bama to win this one. 13.5 is an interesting hook. Obviously this is a big rivalry game. This is a huge game in the South. So I'm not sure I'd be comfortable betting on either of the teams on this one, but I would say that Alabama wins this one.
And our final game we're going to talk about is back in the ACC. And I looked at the spread on this and I said, wow, that's a pretty close spread. And it's Clemson and Notre Dame, with Clemson at 3.5. I know Notre Dame seems to have figured some things out. But do they really have a chance against a good Clemson defense?
I mean, given I know, Notre Dame they had an offensive explosion against Syracuse last week. I think that was aided by some turnovers by Syracuse, but that offense has been anemic to say the least. And Clemson's defense is, Clemson's defense, as we saw. So I think Clemson wins this one, even though it is on the road at Notre Dame. I think Clemson wins this one pretty handily. Cover 3.5, no problem. I would probably take the under here because, Clemson's offense still isn't really hitting on all strides. And obviously their defense is going to shut down Notre Dame by a pretty significant magnitude. So I would take Clemson minus the points and probably the under for this one.
All right. Well, Mitch, where can people follow you on social media?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolfe, WOLFE on Twitter. Unfortunately, there was no rewatch articles this week because the game was on CBS Sports, so I couldn't rewatch it and post clips. because I had to watch it on AJ's YouTube TV. Keep that our little secret here. But we'll get back to it next week. Now that the game's back on ESPN and I can actually watch it and clip it. So I'll be able to actually watch this game live, and I'll be able to suffer along with all of you fans, as I wasn't able to do last weekend.
And this is AJ Black, and it's a 7:00 start, which I'm excited that we will have Saturday to ourselves and not have to worry about watching BC football. It would be nice to see an upset. I just don't see it happening, but weirder things have happened. I mean, look at the Louisville win. So who knows? We'll be following along on Eagle Insider, and I'll have our post-game recap up with Mitch on Monday. So you're going to want to make sure you check that out. You can follow me on Twitter at AJBlack_BC. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you again soon. Take care, everyone.